The train station clock read 6:47 p.m. when I realized David wasn't coming back. I stood there like a fool, clutching my purse, empty except for lint and an old receipt. No wallet. No phone. No dignity. He'd taken everything. Even my wedding ring, claiming it needed repairs. The evening commuters rushed past me, their faces blurred with purpose. Everyone had somewhere to go. Everyone except me. I was 73 years old, abandoned by the man who called me Mom for 8 years. The man who promised to take care of me after my daughter died. The fluorescent lights above me flickered like dying stars. The concrete floor was cold beneath my feet. My arthritis was acting up, sending sharp pains through my knees. But David had no idea who he was messing with. He thought he'd left a helpless widow stranded with nothing. He was about to learn that Margaret Sinclair had been playing chess while he was playing checkers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. The train station smelled of stale coffee, unwashed bodies, and desperation. I replayed the morning in my mind, searching for the moment I should have known. Every detail now felt sinister in retrospect. "Come on, Mom," David had said, his smile too bright, too eager. "Let's go see the city. You've been cooped up in that house for months since the anniversary. Sarah's death anniversary." He'd used my grief as bait. I should have questioned why he insisted I leave my purse in the car. "For safety," he'd said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Pickpockets love elderly women in train stations." I should have questioned why he kept checking his phone every 30 seconds, his fingers dancing across the screen with nervous energy. I should have questioned why he chose a train station 40 miles from home, in a part of the city I'd never been to. I should have questioned why he bought only one return ticket. Instead, I'd trusted him. The same way I'd trusted him when he moved into my house after the funeral. The same way I'd trusted him when he started helping with my finances. The same way I'd trusted him when he suggested I was getting forgetful and needed more support. Now I sat on a cold metal bench, watching the last of the evening trains disappear into the darkness like metallic serpents sliding into tunnels. My feet were swelling in my sensible shoes. My back ached from sitting on the unforgiving surface. The station grew quieter as the hours passed, filling with shadows and the kind of people who had nowhere else to go. A homeless man shuffled past, pushing a shopping cart filled with his entire life. He nodded at me with recognition, one forgotten soul acknowledging another. A security guard approached, his keys jangling like wind chimes. He was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes that reminded me of my grandson. "Ma'am, you can't stay here all night. Station closes at midnight." "I'm waiting for my son-in-law," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He looked at me with pity. That expression I'd seen too many times since Harold died. Poor old Margaret. All alone. So vulnerable. "How long you been waiting?" I checked the station clock again. 9:23 p.m. Almost 3 hours. His radio crackled with static. "We've got a situation here," he muttered into it. "Elderly woman appears to be stranded." Situation. That's what I'd become. A situation to be managed, a problem to be solved. But I wasn't some helpless old woman who'd wandered off from her care facility. I was Margaret Sinclair. I'd survived the Great Recession, buried a husband, raised a daughter, and built an empire in silence. David had just made the biggest mistake of his pathetic, gambling-addicted, predatory life. The guard's radio crackled again. "Social services wants to know if she needs assistance." "No," I said firmly. "I don't need social services. What I needed was revenge. Cold, calculated, devastating revenge. And I was going to get it." 8 years ago, David swept into our lives like a knight in shining armor riding a white horse made of lies. Sarah, my only daughter, had always been drawn to broken things. Stray cats with missing eyes. Wilted plants she'd nursed back to health. Men who needed fixing, who saw her nurturing nature as a bank account they could drain. David seemed different. Revolutionary, even. He held doors. He remembered birthdays. He brought flowers for no reason. He called me Mom within 6 months of dating Sarah, something her previous boyfriends had never done. "He's perfect, Mom," Sarah would gush during our Sunday phone calls. "He actually listens when I talk about work. He asks questions about my day. He wants to meet you properly." I wanted to be happy for her. After 2 divorces and a string of disasters that had left her emotionally bankrupt, Sarah deserved someone stable. Someone who saw her worth. David worked in finance, or so he claimed. He drove a decent BMW, wore expensive suits that fit like they were tailored, and never let Sarah pay for dinner. His apartment was immaculate, his credit seemed solid, and he talked about investment strategies with confidence. The warning signs were subtle at first. So subtle I questioned my own paranoia. He asked too many questions about Harold's business. Casual inquiries wrapped in friendly conversation. Your husband must have been brilliant to build such a successful company from nothing. Sarah mentioned he had excellent investment instincts. It must be overwhelming managing all those complex financial decisions alone. He lingered near my home office when he thought I wasn't looking, his eyes scanning the papers on my desk, the framed photos of properties Harold and I had acquired over the years. He offered to help with my complicated finances more than once, always with that concerned expression he'd perfected. These investment advisors, they prey on widows. You need someone you can trust, someone who cares about your well-being. I declined politely every time. I'd been managing money longer than he'd been breathing. Harold had taught me everything: how to read markets, how to spot opportunities, how to never show your hand. But most importantly, Harold had taught me how to recognize predators. When Sarah got sick, David transformed into the perfect caregiver. He drove her to every appointment, sitting in waiting rooms for hours with magazines he never read. He researched experimental treatments online, printing out articles and highlighting passages. He held her hand through chemotherapy sessions, whispering encouragements when she threw up from the medications. I watched him comfort my dying daughter and felt guilty for ever doubting him. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe my widow's paranoia had made me see threats where none existed. The day Sarah passed, David collapsed in my arms like a man whose world had shattered. We grieved together. Two people who'd lost the center of our universe, the bright star around which we'd both orbited. I don't know what I'll do without her, he sobbed, his tears soaking through my black funeral dress. She was everything to me. You'll stay with me, I said, making the offer that would haunt me for years. We'll get through this together. We're family now. That was my first mistake. But grief makes fools of us all. Within a month, David had moved into Sarah's old room. The room where she'd done homework as a teenager, where she'd cried over boys who didn't deserve her tears, where she'd planned her wedding that never happened. He cooked dinner every night, simple meals that reminded me of the comfort food Sarah used to make. He ran errands without being asked, picking up groceries and prescriptions. He made sure I took my medications, setting out my pills each morning with a glass of water. You're all I have left of her, he'd say when I protested his constant presence. Taking care of you is how I keep her memory alive. He was grieving, I told myself. We both were. It was natural that we'd cling to each other, two survivors of the same shipwreck. But slowly, imperceptibly, things began to change. He started intercepting my mail, sorting through it before I could see it. I don't want you to be overwhelmed by bills and advertisements, he explained. Let me handle the mundane stuff so you can focus on healing. He insisted on grocery shopping alone. You shouldn't be lifting heavy bags at your age. Besides, I know what you like now. He suggested I stop driving. The roads are so dangerous these days. All these distracted drivers texting. Let me take you wherever you need to go. I'm here for you. Each restriction came wrapped in concern. Each boundary crossed in the name of love and protection. The day I found him in my study, going through Harold's old files, he had an excuse ready. I was looking for Sarah's insurance papers, he said, his face the picture of innocence. The estate lawyer said he needed the original documents. I'd already given those papers to the lawyer. Months ago. I remembered because the lawyer had complimented Harold's meticulous record-keeping. That night I changed the locks on my study. David noticed immediately. Don't you trust me? He asked, his voice wounded, his eyes filling with what looked like genuine hurt. Of course I do, I lied, the words sticking in my throat. But I'd started watching him. Really watching. I saw how his eyes lit up when mail arrived from my investment firm. I noticed how he steered conversations toward my retirement plans and estate arrangements. I caught him making phone calls in hushed tones, always ending them abruptly when I entered the room. I started finding gambling websites in the browser history of the computer we shared. Casino advertisements in his coat pockets. Credit card bills with cash advance fees that made my blood run cold. David wasn't grieving my daughter anymore. He'd finished processing that loss and moved on to hunting bigger game. And I was the prey he'd been stalking all along. What David didn't know, what no one knew except my attorney and accountant, was that I was worth $47 million. My late husband Harold had been far more than a small-town businessman with a modest contracting company. He'd been a financial genius who understood that the greatest fortunes are built in silence. When the tech bubble burst in 2000, Harold saw opportunity where others saw disaster. He bought shares of solid companies for pennies on the dollar while everyone else was panicking and selling. When the housing market collapsed in 2008, he purchased properties throughout the Midwest. Apartment buildings, commercial spaces, even entire city blocks in towns that were temporarily down but not permanently out. When oil prices crashed in 2014, he invested in energy companies that were temporarily wounded but fundamentally sound. By the time Harold died 5 years ago, our modest lifestyle hid an empire built on patience, research, and the discipline to act when others were too afraid to move. The house David lived in, worth $2 million, paid off decades ago when it was worth a tenth of that amount. The simple jewelry I wore to church? Antique pieces Harold had collected, each worth more than most people's annual salaries. The investments David kept trying to help me with? Generating more passive income in a month than he'd see in years of legitimate work. I'd learned Harold's most valuable lesson early in our marriage. Never let them see your hand. The moment people know what you're worth, they start calculating what they can take from you. While David schemed to access my checking account, with its deliberately modest balance of $8,000, I controlled assets he couldn't even imagine. The offshore accounts Harold had set up in Ireland and Switzerland. The real estate portfolio spanning 7 states. The art collection stored in climate-controlled warehouses in 3 different cities. I had properties David had never heard of, had never seen. A cabin in Montana overlooking Glacier National Park. A beachfront condo in Miami Beach. A penthouse in Chicago with views of Lake Michigan that I'd bought as an investment and visited twice. After Sarah's funeral, I'd started moving money. Quietly, carefully, methodically. I created new accounts under my maiden name, Margaret O'Sullivan. I transferred assets to trusts David would never find, even if he hired private investigators. I prepared for the day I suspected was coming with growing certainty. The day he'd show his true nature. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Janet Chin who specialized in financial fraud cases. David's finance job at Morrison & Associates? The company had never heard of him. He'd been unemployed for 3 years, living off unemployment benefits and whatever money he could borrow or steal. His business trips to Chicago and New York? Gambling binges in Atlantic City and Las Vegas, funded by credit cards he was rapidly maxing out. He had debts. Serious ones. The kind that motivated desperate acts and dangerous decisions. Janet found more disturbing information. David had done this before. Twice. An elderly aunt in Delaware who died suddenly after changing her will to include him. A widowed neighbor in his previous city in Ohio who'd suffered a heart attack after lending him $50,000. Both deaths were ruled natural. Heart failure. But I knew better. I'd seen enough crime documentaries to recognize a pattern. I started carrying a small recording device in my purse. I changed my will weekly, always with different lawyers in different cities. I left detailed instructions with my primary attorney about what to do if something accidental happened to me. David had no idea he was living with a woman who could buy and sell him like a commodity, who had resources he couldn't fathom, who was 10 steps ahead of every move he thought he was making in secret. But he was about to find out what happened when you tried to con Margaret Sinclair. The train station had been his final test. His ultimate reveal. And he'd failed spectacularly. 3 days after David abandoned me at the train station, my phone rang. I was sitting in my Chicago penthouse, sipping a glass of wine that cost more than David's monthly rent, watching the sunset paint Lake Michigan in shades of gold and crimson. The phone was new, purchased with cash, registered under a false name, completely untraceable. Mom? Oh my God, where are you? I've been looking everywhere. David's voice was frantic. Desperate. The smooth confidence he'd cultivated for 8 years had cracked, revealing the panicked animal beneath. I'd been wondering how long it would take him to realize I was missing. Apparently 3 days was his limit. 3 days before the guilt, or more likely the fear, drove him to check on his abandoned victim. I went back to the train station, but you weren't there. I've been calling hospitals, police stations. I was so worried. There was an emergency. My cousin in Philadelphia had a massive heart attack. I had to leave immediately to be with the family. Smooth, practiced lies delivered with the kind of sincerity that had fooled me for years. I'd already checked through my private investigator. He'd been at the Borgata Casino in Atlantic City, trying desperately to win back money he'd lost the week before. The same cousin he claimed was dying had posted photos on social media from a beach vacation in the Bahamas. I tried to call your cell phone, but it kept going to voicemail. The battery must have died. Please call me back as soon as you get this message. He'd forgotten, of course, that he'd taken my phone. It was probably sitting in a pawn shop somewhere, sold for whatever quick cash he could get. I need to know you're safe, Mom. I love you. Call me. I deleted the message without a second thought. Over the next week, the calls became more frequent, more desperate. The mask was slipping further each day. He'd gone to the police, filing a missing person report. I was a vulnerable elderly woman who disappeared without a trace. He was the concerned son-in-law, beside himself with worry about my safety and well-being. What he didn't know was that I'd already been in contact with Detective Morrison of the Financial Crimes Unit. I'd explained everything, shown him the evidence my investigator had gathered, provided documentation of David's patterns and history. The police weren't looking for me. They were building a case against him. By the second week, David's tone began to change. The desperation was being replaced by something harder. More calculating. Mom, I know you're angry about the train station. I know you think I abandoned you. But it wasn't like that. You don't understand the pressure I was under, the impossible situation I was in. He'd found my empty bank accounts by then. The checking account I'd let him see, the savings account he'd been eyeing, both cleaned out and closed days before his train station gambit. He thought he'd won the lottery. Thought he'd finally gotten access to the money he'd been circling like a vulture for years. What he found instead was debt. Bills I'd deliberately let accumulate. A second mortgage on the house that appeared out of nowhere. Tax liens that materialized overnight. Everything valuable was gone. The jewelry he'd admired disappeared into safety deposit boxes he'd never find. The art that had decorated the walls for decades vanished into storage facilities. Even the car he'd been driving, legally mine, was repossessed while he searched for me. I'd made his victory taste like ash and broken glass. The third week brought pure panic. The house is in foreclosure. The bank says you took out massive loans against it. This doesn't make sense. You never mentioned any financial problems. Call me back. We can fix this together. I'd leveraged everything he could see, everything he'd counted on inheriting. Made it all disappear in a maze of legal complications that would take years to untangle and cost more to resolve than it was worth. Let him try to prove fraud. Every document was legitimate. Every transaction legal. Every move I'd made was within my rights as the sole owner of my assets. By the fourth week he'd stopped calling entirely. I hired a different investigator to check on him. David had moved in with some gambling buddy in Newark, sleeping on a couch in a studio apartment that smelled like cigarettes and failure. His credit was destroyed. His reputation ruined. The few people who'd still trusted him had learned about the debts, the lies, the pattern of preying on elderly women. He'd played for millions and won pocket change. But I wasn't done with him yet. Not even close. 6 months later I was living my absolute best life. The Montana cabin was perfect for writing my memoirs, a project I'd started on Harold's suggestion years before he died. The Miami condo hosted my bridge club friends who thought I was visiting my mysterious wealthy sister. I'd anonymously donated $5 million to cancer research in Sarah's name. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation was already funding 3 promising studies and had attracted matching grants from other donors. I'd started another foundation helping elderly people avoid financial fraud. The irony was delicious, using David's attempted theft to protect other potential victims from predators like him. I was traveling again. Paris in the spring. London in the summer. A Mediterranean cruise where I met a charming retired professor who knew nothing about my money and everything about art history. That's when David's gambling buddy called me. Mrs. Sinclair? This is Tommy Ricci. I got your number from, well, it doesn't matter how. David's in the hospital. Newark General. Heart attack. Bad one. He keeps asking for you. A heart attack. How perfectly convenient. How poetically appropriate. He's been living rough, Tommy continued. Lost everything, you know. Been staying with different people trying to get back on his feet. Stress got to him, I guess. I drove to Newark in my new Mercedes. Cash purchase, naturally. No financing, no monthly payments, just a simple transaction that cleared in minutes. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and despair. David was in the cardiac unit, hooked up to machines that beeped and whirred like electronic cicadas. He looked terrible. Thin in a way that spoke of poor nutrition and chronic stress. Gray-skinned and hollow-eyed. Beaten by life in ways I'd never imagined possible. "Mom," he whispered when he saw me. His voice was papery, fragile. "You came." "I did. I'm sorry. About everything. I was desperate. I owed dangerous people money. Real monsters. I thought if I could access your accounts. You thought you could steal from me and I'd never notice. I never meant to hurt you. I swear on Sarah's grave. I loved her. I really did. But you didn't love me. I was just a mark. A target. A helpless old woman you could manipulate and rob." He closed his eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "What happened to all the money? The house? Everything's gone. Vanished. Is it?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot. My latest bank statement. $49 million in change. His eyes widened until I thought they might pop out of his skull. "I had it all along, David. Every penny you dreamed about. Every dollar you schemed to steal. It was there the entire time." His heart monitor started beeping faster, the rhythm becoming erratic. "You left me at a train station with nothing. But I had everything you wanted. I always did. I don't understand. Harold taught me the most important lesson of building wealth. Never show your hand. You saw exactly what I wanted you to see. A lonely widow with modest savings and valuable property." I stood up, smoothing my designer dress. "Another cash purchase. The house you lived in. $2 million bought and paid for decades ago. The jewelry you convinced me to store safely. $3.5 million in antique pieces. The investments you wanted to help me manage. Worth more than you'll see in 10 lifetimes." David's face had gone completely white. The monitors were beeping more insistently now. "You played the long game, David. 8 years of patient manipulation. Earning my trust. Using my daughter's death as leverage. Planning to steal everything I had." I picked up my purse, checked my reflection in the compact mirror. "But I've been playing longer. And I play to win." I walked toward the door. "Wait. Please. I'm dying. Don't leave me like this. The same way you left me at that train station? It's not the same thing." "You're right," I said, turning back to look at him one final time. "It's not the same at all. You left me thinking you'd won. I'm leaving you knowing I did." I left him there, alone with his machines and his regrets and the crushing weight of knowing exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. 3 days later, Tommy called to tell me David had died. Heart failure brought on by stress and the shock of learning what he'd lost. I didn't attend his funeral. Neither did anyone else. Today I'm sitting on my deck in Montana, writing the final chapter of this story. The foundation I started has helped over 300 families avoid financial predators. Detective Morrison uses our educational materials to train officers in other cities. We've created a network of resources that would have saved David's other victims if it had existed when they needed it. I think about Sarah sometimes. How she'd feel knowing what David really was. How she'd react to learning about the money she never knew existed. "You always were 10 steps ahead of everyone else, Mom," she'd say, laughing at my elaborate revenge plot. The private investigator called last week. 2 more elderly women have come forward with stories about David's manipulation attempts. We're building posthumous cases against his associates, the network of predators who shared information and techniques. Justice isn't always served in courtrooms with gavels and juries. Sometimes it's served at train stations, where desperate men reveal their true nature and abandon their masks along with their victims. Sometimes it's served in hospital rooms, where the powerful realize they've been powerless all along. And sometimes it's served by old women who know that the best secrets are the ones nobody sees coming. David wanted millions. He died knowing they'd been within his reach every day for 8 years, and that his greed and impatience had cost him everything. I got exactly what I deserved too. Everything. And the satisfaction of watching him learn what he'd lost. The sun is setting over the mountains now, painting the sky in shades of victory. Tomorrow I think I'll drive to Yellowstone. Or maybe book a flight to Italy. I've always wanted to see the art galleries in Florence again, and now I can buy paintings instead of just admiring them. When you have $49 million and the wisdom to never trust anyone completely, the world becomes whatever size you want it to be. I choose infinite. David taught me something valuable in the end, though I doubt he intended to. He taught me that some people see kindness as weakness, trust as opportunity, and love as a transaction to be exploited. But he also taught me that the sweetest revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything and making sure they know exactly what they lost. The game is over. I won. And that knowledge is worth more than all the money in my accounts combined.